The human sat at his desk, staring at the holographic map in front of him. He had spent years in this corner of the galaxy, far from the center of any major conflict. After the war, life had become peaceful, but it was a quiet that almost felt empty. His mission was clear: rebuild, help the survivors, and ensure nothing like the war ever happened again. He focused on his work, turning the map to adjust some coordinates when suddenly he heard a noise behind him. Without warning, the door to his quarters slammed open. The human's head shot up, but before he could react, a woman stepped inside. She wasn't just any woman. The alien standing in front of him was tall and striking, her skin a shade of blue that glimmered in the dim light of the room. Her clothes were strange, not like anything he had ever seen, and yet there was something about her that made it impossible to look away. She didn't say anything at first. The human rose to his feet instinctively, unsure whether to reach for his weapon or to speak. But before he could make up his mind, the woman took another step forward, her eyes locking with his. She didn't look frightened. In fact, she seemed completely at ease, as if she belonged there. Without waiting for an invitation, she casually tossed aside her outfit, revealing her true form. The human blinked, unsure of how to respond. She stood there, as if waiting for something, yet said nothing. There was no reason for her to be so bold. No one had ever entered his quarters like this. And certainly no one had ever acted as if they could simply do whatever they pleased. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice calm but firm. The human didn't know what to say. He looked at her, trying to make sense of the situation. There was no indication that she was here to attack him, but the way she held herself suggested that she was a person of importance, someone who was used to commanding attention. Her posture was regal, as though she had no doubt about her right to be there. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady despite the shock he felt. The alien woman smiled, but it wasn't a smile that softened her face. It was a smile of certainty, as if she knew something he didn't. She raised her hand, and he noticed how graceful and confident her movements were. "I am not someone you need to worry about," she said, her eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity. "I've come for a reason. I'll explain later." He didn't trust her, not entirely. She had entered his personal space without any regard for his boundaries, and the fact that she was not answering his questions made him more suspicious. But there was something about her presence, something undeniable, that made him feel as if arguing would be pointless. "I don't understand," he said. "Why are you here?" The alien woman didn't answer at first. She simply walked over to the window and gazed out at the stars. The human stood there watching her, wondering what exactly was going on. Why had she come here? What did she want from him? He hesitated for a moment, then took a few cautious steps toward her. "You've invaded my space," he said, trying to sound calm. "I don't know who you are, and I don't know why you're here, but I can't allow you to stay." At those words, she turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a strange kind of challenge in her eyes. "You don't have a choice," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not leaving. You'll have to make me." The human felt a chill run down his spine. Something about the way she spoke made it clear that this wasn't an empty threat. She wasn't here to fight him, but she wasn't afraid of him either. She stood her ground, unwavering, as if her presence alone was enough to silence any argument. The room was filled with silence for a moment. The human stared at her, trying to figure out her next move. His mind raced, considering all possibilities. Could she be an ally, an enemy, or someone who was simply lost, caught in the vastness of the galaxy like so many others? Finally, he exhaled sharply, trying to regain some control of the situation. "I need answers. Who are you? What do you want?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned back toward the window, her silhouette framed by the stars outside. She appeared deep in thought for a moment, then finally spoke again. "Later," she said. "For now, just know that I won't leave." The human felt a mix of frustration and curiosity. He couldn't afford to let this woman stay in his quarters, but at the same time he couldn't ignore the strange feeling that she was more than just an intruder. There was something powerful about her, something that suggested she had a purpose far beyond what he could comprehend. As the alien woman stood there, her back to him, the human wondered what kind of trouble he had just invited into his life. But one thing was certain. This was only the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could understand. The human stood in the corner of the room, his arms crossed, staring at the alien woman. She had walked into his life without asking, without even a hint of hesitation. Now she stood by the window, gazing out at the stars as if she had every right to be here. The silence between them stretched longer, and the air felt heavy with unspoken words. He was trying to figure out what to do. His mind raced with questions, but nothing seemed to make sense. Why had she come? What was her true purpose? There had to be a reason for her behavior, but he couldn't understand it. No one acted this way, especially not a stranger in a dangerous galaxy. The alien woman broke the silence first, turning slowly to face him. Her eyes met his, unflinching. There was something cold, yet calm in her gaze, as if she had seen worse things than whatever he could throw at her. "You're not going to ask me to leave, are you?" she said with a slight smirk, a challenge in her tone. He felt a flash of frustration but held it in check. He didn't want to show weakness, but this situation was too strange. A woman, no, an alien, had barged in without explanation and was acting as if she owned the place. He had no idea who she was or what she wanted, and yet, here she was. "No, I'm not asking you to leave," he said, forcing his voice to sound firm. "But I need answers. I don't know you, and I don't know what you want. You can't just show up and do whatever you want." He felt the tension building inside him. It was his home, his space. This was his life, and he wasn't used to feeling like it could be so easily disturbed. The woman studied him, tilting her head slightly as if she was trying to understand him. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I don't have time for that. There's more at stake than what you think," she said, her voice calm but with an edge. Her words didn't explain much, but there was something in her tone that made him think she wasn't lying. "What's at stake?" he asked, stepping closer to her. His curiosity started to overcome his frustration. He couldn't ignore the fact that something about her felt different. She wasn't just some random stranger. There was power in her presence, something he couldn't easily explain. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she moved toward a table nearby, picking up a small device and fiddling with it. "You won't understand until I tell you," she said softly, "but I can't explain everything just yet. You'll have to trust me even if you don't want to." He frowned, confused. Trust her? After everything that had happened? She had walked in, removed her outfit, and declared that she wasn't leaving. Trust wasn't something that came easily, especially not when the situation was so strange. "Trust you?" he repeated, incredulous. "You've invaded my space, and now you want me to trust you without telling me why you're here?" She glanced at him, her eyes holding a certain depth that made him pause. "I know it's hard to believe, but sometimes trust is all we have. If you don't want to help, that's fine. But you'll find that without me, your life will get a lot more complicated." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. He didn't know what to make of it. She wasn't being aggressive, but she wasn't backing down either. She had something in mind, something he couldn't see. That much was clear. For a moment, he just stood there thinking. He had lived through wars, dealt with politicians, and fought for survival in ways that had hardened him. But this was something entirely new. A powerful alien, a stranger, standing in his quarters, asking him to trust her. He shook his head, feeling a bit lost. "What do you need from me?" She took a step closer, her face serious now. "I'm being hunted," she said in a low voice. "Not just by anyone, but by my own people. I'm on the run, and I've come here because I believe you can help me. I need you to keep me safe, and I need you to understand that if they find me, everything changes. For you. For this planet." The human stared at her. She had told him more than she had before, but it still didn't answer everything. Who was she? Why was she running from her own people? And how could he, a simple human, possibly protect her from whatever was hunting her? Why me? He asked, finally breaking the silence. What makes you think I can help you? She looked at him, her eyes softening slightly. Because you're alone, she said, her voice quieter now. And sometimes, the people who are alone are the ones who make the biggest difference. The word struck him in a way he didn't expect. For the first time since she walked in, he felt the weight of the situation pressed down on him. The choices ahead wouldn't be easy, but something told him he couldn't just turn her away. He had to make a choice, and he couldn't ignore the pull to find out what this was all about. What exactly do you need from me? He asked again, more quietly now. I need your help, she repeated. And I need you to trust me. In time, you'll understand. The human nodded slowly. This wasn't going to be easy. But for better or worse, he was in this now. Whatever came next, he would have to face it with her. Together, the human sat at the table, his fingers tapping nervously on the surface. The alien woman had asked him to trust her, but he was still unsure. The situation felt too strange, too sudden. 1 minute, he was alone in his quarters, focusing on his work, and the next, an alien woman was standing in front of him, declaring that she wasn't leaving. Her story about being hunted by her own people was hard to believe. But there was something in her eyes, a deep intensity that made him pause. He couldn't explain it, but he knew she wasn't lying. She had a purpose, a mission that only she seemed to fully understand. He had no idea what kind of trouble she was in, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that he was now involved in, something much bigger than himself. For the past hour, they had sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The alien woman had told him just enough to make him understand that she was running for her life, but not enough to give him the full picture. He knew she had secrets, things she wasn't ready to reveal, and he was starting to wonder if he would ever get the answers he was looking for. She broke the silence first, standing up and walking over to the window. Her movements were graceful, almost fluid, as if she was used to navigating unfamiliar spaces with ease. I know this is a lot for you, she said softly, her back to him. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because I have nowhere else to go. The human glanced at her, still unsure of what to say. You don't have to stay here, he said, his voice a bit more hesitant than he intended. There's a whole galaxy out there. Why come to me? She turned to face him, her expression serious. Because I need help, she replied. And you're the only one who might understand. You've lived through conflict, you've seen what happens when people turn against each other. You know what it's like to fight for survival. I need someone who can see beyond all of that. The human didn't respond right away. Her words struck a chord with him. He had seen more than his fair share of violence and war. He had watched entire cities fall, seen families torn apart, and fought to stay alive when everything seemed lost. But this felt different. This woman, this alien, was asking him to get involved in something he didn't fully understand. And yet a part of him couldn't walk away. Maybe it was the loneliness of living on this forgotten planet, far from the rest of the galaxy. Maybe it was the strange connection he felt to her. Whatever it was, he couldn't deny it. He was in this. Now, all right, he said after a moment of silence. I'll help you, but you need to tell me more. I can't just sit here and wait for trouble to show up. She nodded, her expression softening. I know. But the truth is, I can't tell you everything yet. Not until it's safe. My enemies are closer than you think. I've been running for a long time and I can't afford to make any mistakes. The human stood up, walking over to her. How do I know you're not just using me? He asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. What if this is all a trick? What if you're just playing me for something bigger? The alien woman's eyes locked with his, and for a moment he saw something there. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper. Something he couldn't quite place. I'm not playing you, she said, her voice calm but firm. I'm not here for anything but survival, and I'm asking for your help, not because I want something from you, but because I have nowhere else to go. I don't have a plan. Not yet, but I know that with your help I can figure this out. The human took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision he had just made. He had agreed to help her, but he wasn't sure what that would mean. He didn't know what kind of danger they were facing, or what it would cost him. But in that moment he realized something. He wasn't alone anymore. And that, for better or worse, changed everything. He nodded slowly. "All right, we'll figure this out together. But you owe me some answers. And I'm not going to just follow you blindly." The alien woman smiled, a small, genuine smile that softened her features. "I promise you I'll tell you everything when the time is right. But for now, all I need is your trust." They both stood there for a moment, the silence between them, not as heavy as before. The human still had a lot of questions, but there was a quiet understanding now, something unspoken, but real. They were in this together, whether they liked it or not. As they moved toward the door, the human's mind raced with possibilities. The future was uncertain, and there was no telling what dangers lay ahead. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose, a sense that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something important. He didn't know where this would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. His life would never be the same again. The human sat across from the alien woman, the silence between them growing thicker with each passing second. His mind was full of questions, but every time he opened his mouth, he stopped himself. She had promised to explain things, but he knew he wasn't getting the full story. Still, he couldn't push her any harder. If he was going to help her, he needed to understand that some things couldn't be rushed. She was still the same, calm, composed, and distant, as though she had lived a lifetime of running, always looking over her shoulder. The way she held herself, the way she seemed so sure of everything, unsettled him. It was like she had stepped into his life for a reason he couldn't quite see yet. After a long pause, the alien woman stood and walked over to the window. She gazed out at the stars for a while, her back to him. He could tell she was thinking, calculating something. Finally, she spoke again, breaking the silence. "I've told you that I'm being hunted," she said, her voice quieter now. "What I didn't say is why." The human's eyes narrowed. He had been waiting for this moment, the moment when she would finally share the real reason she was on the run. He leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Then tell me," he said, his voice steady but eager. "Why are they hunting you? What did you do?" She turned to face him, her eyes darkening. For the first time, he saw a flicker of something more than just resolve in her gaze. It was fear, but it was quickly buried behind a mask of control. "Didn't do anything," she replied, "at least not intentionally." The human stood up and walked toward her, a sense of urgency in his steps. "What does that mean? You didn't do anything? Then why are they after you?" She hesitated, looking down at the floor for a moment as if gathering the strength to speak. When she met his eyes again, the weight of her words hit him like a shock. "I'm the heir to a throne," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My family rules a planet, a very powerful one. But there's been a betrayal, an uprising. My people, my own family, have turned against me." The human felt his stomach drop. He had suspected there was something more to her, but this was far bigger than he imagined. He had no idea what it meant to rule a planet, to have that kind of power and responsibility, but he could see it now. The tension in her shoulders, the worry that she tried so hard to hide. "Your family is after you?" he asked, his voice soft with disbelief. "Because you're the heir?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. They want control. I was never supposed to inherit the throne. There were others, relatives who believed they were more suited, but when my father was assassinated, I became the only one left who could take his place." Assassinated? The word felt heavy in the air. The human couldn't imagine a family so ruthless that they would go so far as to murder their own ruler. "Yes," she said. "My father was killed and they tried to frame me for it. I ran before they could imprison me. They believe I'm a threat to their power. I'm not just running from my family. I'm running from an entire empire that believes I'm their enemy." The human couldn't help but shake his head in disbelief. "Why didn't you just tell me this from the start?" I couldn't, she said, her voice cracking for the first time. If I tell too many people, they'll know where I am. My enemies are watching. The longer I stay here, the more danger I put you in. He stepped closer, studying her. There was no doubt that she was telling the truth. The way she spoke, the pain in her eyes, it all added up. She wasn't lying. This wasn't some game she was playing. Her life was on the line, and she had nowhere to go but here, with him. He felt the weight of her words, the responsibility of the situation settling on his shoulders. This was more than just a stranger asking for help. This was a woman who had been thrust into a war for power, a war that had torn apart her family and everything she had known. The human took a deep breath, trying to process everything. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice quieter than before. "What's the next step?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. "We have to stop them. I can't go back to that life. I won't let them win." He nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision he had made. He had agreed to help her, but this was no longer just about protecting a stranger. This was about fighting for something bigger, something that could change the course of her people's future, and maybe even his own. "What's the plan?" he asked. She walked toward the small table in the corner of the room, picking up a small device and holding it out to him. "I have allies," she said. "But I can't trust anyone. We'll have to move quickly and we'll have to stay ahead of them. But first, I need you to trust me completely. Are you ready for this?" He took the device from her, his grip steady. "I'm ready," he said. "Let's do this." They stood there, two people from different worlds, united by a common cause. The future was uncertain, but in that moment, they both knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The human stood by the door, his mind racing. He had agreed to help her, but now the weight of that promise was starting to feel heavier. The alien woman, the heir to a throne, was on the run from her own family, her people, and a ruthless empire. Every step they took now could lead to danger, and they couldn't afford any mistakes. He glanced over at her, who was sitting quietly at the table, working on a small device. She hadn't said much since their conversation, but he could feel the tension in the air. They were both on edge, aware that their time was running out. She had allies, but he wasn't sure who he could trust anymore. The more he learned about her, the more complicated everything became. "We need to move," the alien woman said, breaking the silence. She didn't look up from her device, but her voice was calm and steady. "I've just received a signal. My enemies are closing in on this location. We don't have much time." The human's heart raced. He had expected this, but hearing it from her made it all too real. They had been living in a kind of false peace, hiding in the shadows, but that peace was about to shatter. "Are you sure they've found us?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She nodded. "Yes, they've tracked my movements. The signal was sent from a ship nearby. They're coming. We need to leave now." He swallowed, trying to push down the rising fear. "Where do we go? We can't just run forever." "I know," she said, finally looking up at him. "But I have a plan. There's a place where we can lay low for a while. It's not perfect, but it's safer than here." The human didn't say anything, but he could see the determination in her eyes. She wasn't going to back down, no matter how dangerous things could. He had seen that same kind of resolve before, and it made him both nervous and impressed. "All right," he said, nodding. "Let's go." They moved quickly, gathering what little they could carry. The human grabbed a few supplies, knowing they might not get another chance to prepare. He had never been in a situation like this before, but somehow he felt more alive than he had in years. His life had been a quiet one before she came into it, but now it felt like he was part of something much bigger. The alien woman was already at the door, waiting for him. Her expression was unreadable, but her movements were sharp and efficient. She had been trained for situations like this, he realized. She wasn't just running from danger, she was fighting for her life, for her future. They made their way out of the building, moving quickly through the dimly lit hallways. The human kept his eyes on her, watching her every move. She didn't speak, but her presence was enough to guide him. He followed her without question, trusting her instincts even though he had no idea what lay ahead. As they stepped out into the open, the human felt a wave of unease wash over him. He had lived through wars and conflicts, but this felt different. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting against an empire, an entire system that wanted to see her dead. The alien woman turned to him, her eyes hard. "Stay close. Don't speak unless I tell you to. And whatever happens, don't trust anyone we meet." He nodded, his grip tightening around the small bag he had packed. He had no idea who they might encounter, but he understood now that his life was no longer just his own. It was tangled up with hers, and that meant the stakes were higher than he could ever have imagined. They moved through the streets, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. The city was quiet, too quiet, and the human couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced over at the alien woman, but she was already several steps ahead, her attention focused on the path before them. She was a soldier, a leader, and in this moment she was the only one who knew what to do. They reached a small alleyway and the woman paused, signaling for him to stop. She turned to face him, her face illuminated by the dim light from the street lamps. "This is where we split up," she said quietly. "There's a transport waiting nearby. I'll go ahead and make sure it's clear. Stay here and wait for me." He hesitated. "Are you sure it's safe?" "I'll be fine," she said. "I have to do this, trust me." The human didn't want to let her go alone, but he knew she was right. She had a plan, and he had to trust it. He watched as she disappeared into the darkness, her figure blending into the shadows. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. The human's mind raced, every little sound making him jump. He had never felt so exposed. He wanted to follow her to make sure she was all right, but he knew better. He had to wait, as difficult as it was. Finally, he heard footsteps approaching. His heart skipped a beat, but when the alien woman appeared around the corner, his relief was overwhelming. "It's clear," she said, her voice calm as ever. "Let's go." They didn't waste any time. Together they moved quickly toward the transport. The human's mind was still reeling, but he knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. Their journey was far from over, and the danger was only going to increase. But for now, they had made it through another obstacle, and that gave him a glimmer of hope. The transport moved swiftly through the night, the low hum of the engines the only sound that broke the silence. The human sat beside the alien woman, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Outside the small window, the dark landscape blurred as the vehicle sped across unfamiliar terrain. They were leaving behind the only home he had known for the last few years, and yet, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like the beginning of something new, something that could change everything. The alien woman was focused, her gaze never straying from the road ahead. She had told him the place they were going was safe, but he knew better than to take anything at face value. Nothing about their situation was safe. The dangers they faced were real, and he could see it in her eyes. The constant weight of being hunted, of running from her own people. He stole a glance at her, watching the way she held herself. She was still the same as when they first met. Strong, confident, and composed. But there was something different now. He had seen the cracks in her armor, the moments when she had let her guard down. And even though she tried so hard to hide he knew the truth. She was scared, just like him. For a brief moment, the human thought about asking her more questions, about her family, about the betrayal, about the empire she was running from. But something held him back. He wasn't sure if he was ready for the answers. He wasn't sure if she was ready to share them. Instead, he focused on the road ahead, his thoughts drifting to the next step of their journey. "We're almost there," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but he could hear the tension beneath it. "Just a few more miles and we'll reach the safe house." He nodded, trying to mask the unease he felt. "How do we know it's safe? We can't trust anyone." "I know," she said, turning to look at him. "But I've been to this place before. It's been off the grid for a long time. No one knows about it, not even my enemies. It's the best chance we have right now." The human didn't respond. He wanted to believe her, but there was a part of him that couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get worse. They had been lucky so far, but how much longer could that luck hold out? The transport continued to move through the night, the moonlight casting long shadows across the land. The human glanced out the window again, noticing how quiet the world seemed. It was as if everything around them was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He didn't know what, but he had a sense that whatever it was coming soon. Hours passed, and the vehicle slowed as they neared the edge of a dense forest. The trees loomed in the distance, their dark shapes barely visible in the night. The alien woman turned to him, her face serious. "We need to move quickly," she said, her voice low. "The safe house is just up ahead, but we can't risk being seen. Stay close and don't make any noise." The human nodded, his heart beginning to race. They had arrived, but the real danger was only just beginning. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. They stepped out of the transport and into the cold night air. The alien woman led the way, moving quickly and silently through the forest. The human followed closely behind, doing his best to match her pace. His mind raced as they moved deeper into the trees. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that their every step was being tracked. They reached the safe house in what felt like no time at all. The small hidden cabin was tucked away in a clearing, barely visible from the outside. The alien woman moved quickly to the door, her hands shaking just slightly as she unlocked it. When the door creaked open, she motioned for him to enter first. The human stepped inside, immediately struck by the silence. The cabin was small but well kept, with a few basic supplies scattered around. It felt like a place that had been abandoned for a long time, and yet there was something comforting about it. Maybe it was the sense of safety, or maybe it was just the quiet after the chaos they had been through. The alien woman closed the door behind them and locked it, then turned to face him. "We need to stay here for a while," she said. "I'll contact my allies, but until then, we have to lay low. No communication with anyone outside this room. If my enemies are tracking me, they could be watching everything." The human nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "How long do we have?" "A few days at most," she said, her voice strained. "After that, we'll need to move again. But we can't afford to be caught here, not yet." He took a deep breath, trying to push down the tension in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was the fear of being discovered or the weight of the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. Either way, he knew he couldn't turn back. He had already made his choice. The alien woman moved to the small table in the corner of the room, pulling out a set of tools. "I need to fix this device," she said, pointing to the small communicator. "It's the only way I can contact my allies. Once it's working, we'll have a better idea of what's going on. But until then, we wait." The human sat down across from her, watching her work. It was strange, he thought, how quickly things had changed. One moment, he had been living a quiet life, and now he was a part of something much bigger. A war, a betrayal, an empire. It all felt so far removed from his own world. But now it was his world too. For the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of what they were up against. And yet, even in the face of uncertainty, he knew one thing, for sure. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The days passed in silence. The cabin, though small, became a strange kind of sanctuary for the human and the alien woman. The quiet was both comforting and unnerving. They spent most of their time indoors, away from the prying eyes of whoever might be hunting them. The alien woman worked tirelessly on her communicator, trying to repair the damaged device that might connect her to any allies she still had. The human didn't ask questions. He had learned not to, knowing she would share when the time was right. But his mind couldn't stop racing. The situation they were in was more complicated than he could ever have imagined. The woman he had helped, a stranger at first, was no ordinary person. She was royalty, an heir to a throne and the enemy of a powerful empire. He was just a man who had never wanted anything more than peace. But peace was a luxury he couldn't afford now. The weight of their circumstances grew heavier with each passing day. Outside the world seemed quiet, but inside the cabin there was constant movement, both physical and mental. The alien woman's focus on the device never wavered. She was relentless, determined to make contact with anyone who might be able to help her. He admired that about her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the air grew cooler, the woman finally looked up from her work. She had been silent for a long time, and the human had learned to fill that silence with his own thoughts, trying to make sense of it all. But when she spoke, her voice broke through the noise in his head. "We have a problem," she said, her voice tight, as though she had just received some bad news. The human's heart sank. He stood up quickly, his eyes searching hers for any hint of what was coming next. "What is it?" "I've made contact," she replied, her tone still cold. "But the message I received wasn't good. My enemies are closing in faster than I thought. They know where I am, and they're sending reinforcements." The words hit him like a wave, drowning out everything else. They had been hiding here, for days thinking they were safe, but the truth was clear now. The danger was much closer than they had anticipated. "How much time do we have?" he asked, his voice low, trying to keep the panic from creeping in. "A few hours, at most," she answered, standing up and walking over to a small table. "They'll be here before nightfall." He felt his stomach twist. He had known this day would come, but the reality of it was still hard to face. They couldn't stay here, not anymore. The safe house had been a temporary refuge, but now it was a trap. "What do we do?" he asked, his mind racing. "Where do we go?" The alien woman turned to face him, her expression hard but determined. "We leave. We have to get out of here before they arrive. I have another safe house further away. But it's not just about running anymore. We need to fight back. If we don't, they'll catch us and I'll be lost to them forever." Nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. They couldn't keep running. They had to make a stand, even if they didn't know how. "We're in this together," she said, as if reading his thoughts. "No matter what happens next, we fight. We fight because we have no other choice." The human didn't hesitate. He could see the resolve in her eyes, and he knew that following her wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something bigger. They weren't just two people trying to escape. They were part of a larger fight, a fight that would determine the future of an entire world, and perhaps even the fate of countless others. Together, they gathered their things quickly, packing only what they could carry. There was no time to waste. As they prepared to leave, the human looked at the woman one last time, feeling a strange sense of calm in the midst of the chaos. No matter how hard the road ahead would be, they would face it side by side. They left the cabin and moved through the forest with speed and stealth. Every step felt heavier, every rustle of leaves more dangerous. The human could hear the pounding of his own heart as they moved, but he kept his focus on the woman ahead. She was leading them, as she had from the very beginning. He trusted her. Hours later, they arrived at the second safe house. It was a small, hidden outpost on the edge of a remote valley. There was no sign of life, no indication that anyone had been there for years. But it was secure, and for now, that was enough. The alien woman worked quickly, securing the door and checking the perimeter. She didn't say much, but he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. They were both running on empty, but they couldn't stop now. "Are you all right?" he asked after a long silence. She nodded, but the fatigue in her face told a different story. "I'm fine. We're safe, for now." He didn't respond. Instead, he sat down, leaning against the wall, and closed his eyes for a moment. He was exhausted, but the adrenaline kept him moving. They had made it this far, but there was no time to relax. The war wasn't over, and the fight was far from finished. There were still enemies to face, battles to be won, and decisions to be made. But as long as they had each other, the human knew one thing for sure: they would continue fighting, together,